Um, okay, so um, I'm not Rob Lay from Shopify. Um, he's amazing, and I'm only a stand-in for his otherwise would-be fantastic talk that I've heard before, and it's absolutely inspirational. I wish he was here, but I will do the very best that I can to fill his shoes. So my name is Dayton Pereira, and I am a design sprint facilitator, as it says on the screen behind me. Um, and you're probably wondering, or not, what a design sprint is. For the developers in the room, it is not an agile sprint. So that would be, something completely different that has to do with actually, mapping out your backlog and moving it and doing a bunch of other developer-related things. A design sprint is, it's a framework that was designed by the folks at Google Ventures. And what they did was took a number of different approaches to building products or designing products and put it together in a 5-day framework that involves the concepts that you've actually heard a lot of today, things like design thinking and lean startup, and jobs to be done actually is something that I like to incorporate in mine, and other tools. And they put this awesome book together. You should buy this book. Unfortunately, it's not going to be given away at the end because we didn't have any copies, but I didn't know that before I got here. So everything you ever wanted to know about running your own design sprint is in the book. That is all. Thank you. So we got 22 minutes now, and I can answer your questions. No, just kidding. Okay. So let's just talk about what a design sprint is and sort of going through the process of what it is. If anybody attended the design thinking workshop upstairs, it's very similar to that, but it's actually broken up into very, very specific activities that you might take over a 5-day period. So some of the examples that you'll see on screen are actually a sprint that I ran, or that ended yesterday for me, and started on Monday with some very sort of loose ideas that actually ended up in something tangible that we could test. So on Monday, we make a map, we choose a target, we identify what that is and who we're going to be designing a product for. On Tuesday, you do your sort of divergent thinking, where you're getting a group of people to actually come up with multiple solutions. Then you decide, and then you create a prototype, and then you test it. And the objective of running a design sprint is really to reduce risk. In any kind of product design, even if you're building a product for a very big company or a very little company, or you're building a new feature in an existing set of, or a suite of products, what you'll always discover is that there's risk associated with that. There's stuff that you don't know, and the goal of this is to be able to actually achieve that. So what's the big deal? Well, first of all, you just saw up there that it's supposed to be done in 5 days. So what can you really come up with in 5 days? Like, what is the reality of building and prototyping something in 5 days? If you were in the little workshop that we did earlier, you saw that we came up with some really interesting ideas. But maybe in the real world, you need something that has a little bit more meat. So this is what most people's workday looks like. It's essentially a whole bunch of meetings. You do a little bit of work, then you do a whole bunch more meetings, and that is pretty much the end of your day or your week. And in that week, you might get about 5 good hours of actually getting something done. And that's pretty much reality for most of us that are actually working full time and trying to have meaningful lives. In a productive workday, however, this is what it looks like. It's you work and work and work, take a little break and maybe some other breaks, and then you do a bunch more work, and then you're done. So a productive work week, you're actually working for a full 30 hours. And that is not something that you typically do when you get out there and you do what you do. Now you multiply that by 5 to 7 people in your typical sprint, and you got between 150 and 210 hours of productive thinking and doing work, which is in which time is like a gold mine of the kinds of things that you can actually deliver or develop or ideate. So that's sort of the nuts and bolts about why it's actually possible. So I'll give you a preview of an actual design sprint that was run like that ended yesterday, and I'll show you some real stuff that we created. So remember I showed you this diagram earlier, and we start with a mapping activity. And mapping, when I started running design sprints, mapping was a little bit weird. People didn't really understand some of the terminology. And in the context of building, let's say, a software product, that's most of the sprints that I run are software design products, we're actually looking at mapping a customer experience. So you might have heard things like customer journey mapping or empathy mapping, which are two different things. But in our map, we're essentially trying to map out a workflow of what that customer or person or market segment might actually do from one end to the other, and identify how we might integrate our solution within that workflow. So you do these things on the mapping day. And it's actually very, very, very structured, which is different from how you might otherwise do an activity like this, where you'll start with mapping the customer experience, and then you start doing an activity called asking the experts. A sprint is not a replacement for user research. User research is absolutely critical, so you should really walk into a sprint knowing something about what it is your customer actually wants. But you also have the added opportunity to ask people that know more about the problem space than you happen to. And while they're doing that, again, you might have heard the HMW, the how might we's. You'll do that and capture a bunch of notes. And then finally, you'll prioritize and pick a target. So this is an example of a project I worked on this week. And you can't see all of it, but for the most part, we were creating a marketplace of AV contractors and AV system integrators. And this was an interesting problem because it's a really, really niche market, and people are trying, the business owner was trying to create an opportunity out of this particular market. People are looking up. Are there funny jokes up there that I don't know about? Okay, maybe not. So this map is just a really simple illustration of what we did, and this is pretty much as complicated as it gets. And during that time, we would have asked a whole bunch of how might we questions. And then you take those notes down and you try to create, or you write down problems as solutions. So how might we do this, or how might we do that, to actually try to articulate what it is that you're trying to solve. And then you take all of those ideas that you've collected from your entire sprint team, and you stick it on a wall, and it's generally a big fat mess, which is part of the sort of the creative process. So you take that mess and you start to now organize some of these ideas and these themes into what we're trying to illustrate here on the screen. And in doing so, you then take this approach that's called dot voting or dotocracy, where everybody in silence will essentially take little stickers and put those stickers around ideas or themes that they find particularly interesting. And what becomes really interesting about this kind of solutioning is that you get more ideas, or you generate a volume of ideas, which is really the point, than you could come up with on your own. It is definitely not a designer exercise. The sprint that I ran, it was actually between a father and son team. The father was, I think, 68 years old, and he was the most vibrant and dynamic participant I've ever had in a sprint. He drew the shit out of every solution. It was amazing. And that was absolutely what I did not expect. So it was really, really great to have him during the entire thing. So you do that, and you'll come up with a whole bunch of opportunities and ideas that you can then solution further. So day 2, so now at the end of this day, you have come up with a map, you have picked a target, you have asked all these right questions, and you have a pretty clear idea of what it is that you want to solve. And hopefully prior to the sprint, you've actually done your homework on who your customers are and how they behave and so on. So the next thing is 3 activities called lightning demos, and then I'll get into what divide and swarm means, and then of course the 4-step sketch. So a lightning demo is something that you will get an entire team. So there's no such thing as like a brand new idea. So what a lightning demo is you look at things that kind of solve your problem from different industries, from different business verticals, and you sort of screen cap them or you research them, and you sort of beg, borrow, and steal, and then remix into new ideas that you could use for your purposes. So the ideas that we used for the sprint that I ran was around using like staffing type staffing agencies like Upwork. We looked at tools like Airbnb for how profiles might look. We looked at some contract negotiation and sort of escrow payments. So like really random things that we could then combine into a single solution for our problems, or for the solutions of our problems. What you also end up with is a lot of solutions. And you can't always solve absolutely everything, as tempting as it is to do so. And generally at the start of a sprint, you'll say, okay, well, we have all these different goals that we want to try to achieve, and we want to solve and boil the ocean and eat the entire elephant. And you really can't. So what you try to do is pick like 2 things, and then you either split up your team into 2, and one group of people will solve one part, another group will solve another part. It's really interesting. And that way they can come together at it and solve the entire solution. And then you do an activity that's called the 4-step sketch. And again, this activity is sort of prescribed by the design sprint itself, but there's lots of activities that you might do. There's an activity that I liked a lot that Andreas talked about in the design thinking workshop, which was about coming up with an idea and then reversing that idea and then remixing those ideas. Really, really useful stuff. And in fact, there's a number of other ideas that you might be able to get if you get a book called Thinker Toys. Really, really powerful book. If anybody's ever played Color Switch, the little game on your phone with the color bouncing. Does anybody know Color Switch? It's like downloaded like about 140 million times. The guy that was inspired to build Color Switch was the activities that he designed Color Switch based on the activities in Thinker Toys. So highly recommend that book. It's brilliant. So the 4-step sketch is really around collecting information, walking around your room of sticky notes and your big mess that you've created, coming up with some generic ideas, and then doing sort of the most important exercise out of this, which is Crazy Eights. And Crazy Eights is effectively, how do you take an interface and remix it and redesign it in 8 different varieties in 8 minutes. So that's the point of it. It's pretty intense, and a lot of people generally get stuck at it. But once you practice a little, you'll actually find that you can solve just one thing in 8 different ways pretty easily. And then finally, you'll come up with a big solution sketch. So then you'll take all your solutions, and you'll do some more dot voting, and then the speed. So this happens on the next day. So every time you see this big green slide, it's because a day has passed. And then you'll actually end up building a storyboard, and I'll show you what that looks like. So generally, when you're in an environment where you're trying to make a decision, they don't always go down like this. It's usually a lot more painful, where you have a lot of critiquing and shouting in a boardroom, and there's too much discussion. So this way, you've actually come up with a number of solutions, and then you silently walk around your room of solutions that have been developed by your entire team, and you end up identifying what you like and what you don't like, but you're not actually allowed to share it. What the facilitator or the person that's running the design sprint will actually pitch every one of your ideas, which is kind of painful if you haven't really done a very good job of articulating your idea into a sketch. So you really want to be as detailed and articulate as possible. And then finally, you'll make a decision. There's one key role in a design sprint that I failed to mention earlier. It's the role of the person that makes hard decisions, and we call him, for lack of a better word, the decider. Of course, whenever there's a tie to be broken, that person actually makes those hard decisions. So this is a storyboarding activity that we did. So usually the storyboarding involves like a full-blown sketch of every screen, but I found that the pace of that activity is actually quite slow, and it doesn't really yield the kind of pace that you did in the previous 2 days. So I've modified it a little bit based on some stuff that I found online by, I think it's a company in Belgium. And what they do is they actually map out the story as you might do with user stories when you're building software. And then after that, you actually attach sketches to it. So we did this. This was the story for what it is that we were trying to develop. And then this mess of stuff essentially became the illustrations of this thing. So you'll see that the little post-its were just moved from the wall to the stick to the whiteboard, and now we have we actually start to sketch multiple solutions to match what those stories are. And this is all happening just in a really, really short period of time. It takes an immense amount of energy, but it is absolutely worth it. So now you've got your sketches, you've got your scribbles and whatnot. You've done the very, very best that you can to write down the words, because words are important. It says that too. And now your next effort is actually to generate a prototype. And this is the part where I sort of go off the rails from what's actually in the book. I see somebody sleeping. There he goes. And I actually don't use some of the tools that have been described. So what I use are just design tools, because that's what I'm more familiar with, and two products, Sketch and Envision, to actually pull prototypes together. And the point of building a prototype is to really build a facade of the real thing. This is sort of a great, I love this little thing about your willingness to change over time when you're building a prototype. So you take your prototype, and let's say you spend 3, 4, 5 weeks on building like an HTML thing, and it's all awesome, does a whole bunch of stuff. Your willingness to change, or your impressions as time passes, really change about your customers. So in the beginning, if you took 1 day to build a prototype, you'll throw it out and you won't really feel bad. You take a week, and suddenly the same thing that you did become your user's fault, and they're the idiots, and you aren't. So that's really interesting. And then the next idea is around the quality of an actual prototype. And your goal is to make it sort of not too hot, not too cold, and just right. But of course, just right is a variable idea. You don't really know what it is until you understand who your customers are. So if you're building something, let's say for the medical industry, you can't have some just sort of sketched out little random looking thing. It's just not good enough. The same would be true for banking, or it really depends on what your goals are. So in our case, our goal was to present it or create a prototype that was something that we could present or demo to a group of people at a conference, where a number of people would come down. Folks like Christie Digital show up at this AV conference, and we wanted to show them what it is that we have. And so our Goldilocks quality would have to be something different. So this is what we built. I don't know if you can really, no, you really can't see it. But anyways, that's what we made. And we made this in one day. So it wasn't a long process. It was a very long one day, but it was one day, and it was all clickable, and it was great. It didn't take too long at all, and we really, and most of the work is actually leading up to it. So on days 1, 2, and 3, you'll spend time drawing things, writing out words, writing out the content to actually create the prototype that you can actually test on people. And of course, testing is the last and most important component, without which you're really not going to be learning anything. So you're just going to be guessing at the quality of the product that you're creating, or even your idea. So you need to go through that validation process, which I'm sure is a theme that you've heard over and over and over today. And again, I'm going to repeat it because I can't stress enough how important testing things is. So you test on 5 people, you run a single interviewer, and generally the layout that I like for testing is one tester with the rest of the group in a different room that are observing the actual test happening in real time. So I'll either stream that, or if the test can't happen in person, then I'll use tools like, what do I use? Validately or usertesting.com. So those would be good tools as well. Don't ask leading questions. There's nothing worse than saying, how awesome is my product, to get the response, yes, it's so awesome, because that'll get you nowhere. And then get your team to observe and capture notes as you're going through them. So the reason why we choose 5 is because 5 is pretty much, beyond 5, you're not really learning anything significantly new. You've learned pretty much about 85% of the things, or 85% of the errors in the first 5 interviews. You'll probably learn the most number of things in the first interview. And I'll give you a quick example. Yesterday, we ran our interviews with that prototype I showed you earlier. And in the first interview, we discovered a whole bunch of things that were completely wrong. We're like, oh my God, we need to fix this immediately. And because the prototype is so disposable, we were actually able to change some big components in the user experience in like 30 minutes. Then run the second test where it was clearly a solution. So that was awesome. And that is pretty much all I have for you. So go forth and run your own design sprint. Make awesome products.
Thanks. Thank you so much, Dayton.
All right, you have questions.
We're gonna have questions. First off, how many people have run a design sprint? How many people are going to run a design sprint now? Awesome. Great. Does anyone have questions for Dayton around design sprints, or even applying design sprints to certain problems?
Yeah. I love that mic thing. It's the best.
In third year GP Day, we have a class, and we had to do 2 design sprints right after each other.
Yeah.
And when we hit the second one, we were already like brain dead. We were like, okay, now what? Like, we couldn't think. So like, what's a step that we can take to help reignite that brainstorming process to like when even like at the beginning we were kind of dying, like, okay, like here's the issue. We thought of a couple ideas, and then we didn't know where to move forward. So like, what's a way to like get things going again?
How to sort of reignite the fire? Are you trying to solve the same problem, or is it a different problem altogether?
Well, the first one it was a game design sprint, and the other one was a video design sprint, but it was all the same issue.
Okay. I think, so some of the tools that are sort of prescribed by the book they're kind of static, but I really like, if you, like the book that I mentioned, Thinker Toys, go over that, and one of the activities that they have is you actually put, so let's say in Thinker Toys they have about 100 or so different creative ideation strategies, and one of the things that they do is you take those 100 ideas, 100 strategies, you put them in a hat, and then you shuffle them around, and instead of doing like, the 4-step sketch or whatever, you just pick out random ideas or random strategies, and then you apply them, and it really adds a dynamic sort of variable style to your sprint, and it's a lot more fun to do.
Thank
And
you.
lots of coffee. Coffee is awesome. Yes. Anything else? Oh, we have Ian here.
Do you have any resistance from stakeholders that may think that the qualitative feedback you're getting isn't strong enough? Or how do you deal with stakeholder resistance to the introduction of doing something new like this?
So I guess I can find myself in a bit of a unique situation for myself. If they don't want to run a design sprint, they simply don't hire me. So it's not a problem I have. But if it is a problem that you have, I think what I've also converted a lot of people from thinking, okay, this is like a boring process, or one that's not really relevant to me, into a process that is something that they swear by. Like Paul, my client, he's like, oh, I wish we applied this process to that other project that I worked on with him for a year, because we would have made so many more discoveries early on in the project that we could then implement without having to learn about them the hard way after spending 8 months of building something that we just throw out. So I think it's just articulating the risk in building stuff without testing. Yeah, there's one here. There's one. Actually, Matt has the box. He has the power.
Kind of related to Ian's question.
Yeah.
Was ideally 5 days to run it would be awesome.
Yeah.
Realistically speaking, though,
Yeah.
in a lot of cases, that's not going to be possible. So,
Sure.
do you have any strategies around how to maybe compress this a bit?
Sure. So the question is, how do you make a design sprint elastic? And that is absolutely a question and an issue that I get a lot of times. So the way that I like to do it is that you'll actually find that in the first 3 days, where you're getting sales, maybe a VP of strategy or marketing, you get these people together and they will be helping you put together solutions and whatnot. You can even skip the mapping exercise and do it on a previous week, because the momentum that you need is actually for 2 days when you're diverging for solutions and converging on one that you'll then focus on. And so those 2 days are actually really precious days that you could try to do. And then after that, the prototyping activity is actually, I find that if the bigger the group, the harder it is to actually build a prototype. So I like the prototype team to be really lean, like 2-3 people, and so you don't need the entire office or the entire sprint team to be part of that prototyping team. So yeah, that's how I do it.
Awesome.
Yeah, there's one more here. And we got 5 more seconds.
Yes. Okay.
Shout out.
How might be questions?
Yeah.
Examples of it, because I found it sort of difficult to create once when I was doing my.
Okay, so the question was, what's an example of a how might we question? I can't think of one right now. Well, there's actually a table that I will be at, and you can join me on that table, and I'll try to answer that question then, because it escapes me now, and I think we've run out of time. I think that's it.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Dayton.
Thank you.